Hello, welcome. Welcome, everyone. I'm just going to give a moment to let everyone get logged in, and then we will be getting started shortly. While you're logging in, if you want to, oh my gosh, hi, BB. A friend of mine is logged in. She's saying hello. Yes, drop in the chat where you're tuning in from. We always love to see where everyone is. I know BB's in San Francisco. Ooh, hi from Halifax. Very exciting. Yeah, let us know where you're tuning in from. We always love to see that. I'll just give another minute for people to get logged in. Alexandria, Virginia, hello. Very cool. Love having folks from all over. Milwaukee. Fantastic. Okay, I think we are about ready to get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're here to talk about Simply Genius, the fantastic new book by Kristen Miglore, and we will be joined by the incredible Hetty McKinnon. We're very excited to get started, but I'm just going to give you a few notes before we do that. I'm Zoe Friesen. I'm the events manager here at Book Larder. We are a community cookbook store located in Seattle, Washington. We do 100% cookbooks and food writing. And we love to do all kinds of author talks and author events. As you can imagine, we've been doing a lot more virtual events the last couple of years, although we are starting to bring back some in-person events, which are fantastic. We love being able to have these virtual events as well, where we can connect with authors and interviewers from all over that we might not be able to, get into our shop in person. And we also love having you, our audience, be able to tune in from all over. So we love doing these, and we certainly plan to continue doing them into the future. So thank you so much for being here. The talk will be recorded this evening, and then it will be posted up on our YouTube channel within about 48 hours. So if you have to jump off early, you can always catch the end, or if you want to send it to a friend or just rewatch it. Sometimes I just, put it on while I'm cooking, like a podcast in my kitchen. So that's always fun. I do have the live transcript turned on right now. So if you want to turn that off or turn it on, you can control that at the bottom of your screen. It's under the 3 dots under the More button. And then let's see, what else do I need to tell you? So Kristen and Hetty will be chatting, and then they will also save time for your questions. So make sure you put your questions in the Q&A box so Hetty can see those and make sure that those get answered. You can use the chat to chat with each other, chat with me and everything like that. But if you do have questions for Kristen and for Hetty, make sure you put those in the Q&A box. Thank you for everyone that has purchased a copy of the book from us. We really appreciate it. And if you have not done so yet, that would be fantastic. It's always a great idea. So I will be dropping the link in the chat as well to purchase a copy of the book from us. And we do have, let's see here. We do have book plate signed copies. So those are available in our shop. Okay, well, without further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over. Welcome, Kristen and Hetty. Hey.
Thank you so much, Zoe. That was, I think Zoe covered everything. Hi, Kristen. Hi, Hetty, and hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah, it's so great to see, it's basically all of America in this chat right now. Where are you? I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. Oh, and I'm in Brooklyn, so we're virtually on opposite sides of the country, but here we are. Amazing. Congratulations on Simply Genius. I have my copy here. Sorry, it's got a blur. I have mine too. Yay! Now this is your. What number is this? What number are we up to for you? This is the 3rd Genius cookbook. There have been plenty of other Food52 cookbooks, and I've had a hand in various ones in various ways, but these are the 3 ones that are my own babies. Yeah, that's incredible. You said, I think that it could have been the day that it launched, you posted on Instagram that it took you 4 years to write this book. And that's a pretty long time, like probably longer than most cookbooks take to write. Was that 4 years of writing time or 4 years of production?
4 years of everything, I guess. I would say, would you say that the average cookbook that you know of takes like roughly 2 years from start to finish? Is that like a good average assumption?
Yeah, but I guess, you know, the writing bit, I mean, I
Mhm.
feel like when you hand in your manuscript, it can take 2 years to get to the shelf.
Mm.
I mean, in Australia, it's a lot faster, but in the
Oh,
US, you know,
interesting.
there's that whole kind of selling in period. So they like to do it 2 years in advance or something like that, 18 months perhaps. But I mean, I kind of just feel like this book, what was your process in gathering these recipes? Because that I can imagine is the main, was a huge part of the job, was just gathering and thinking about what you were going to be putting in this book called Simply Genius, because it's such a specific topic.
Right. It's so interesting too to see what, because has kind of been there from the beginning of us coming up with this idea, and what really evolved over just kind of the happenstance of it taking 4 years. It took 4 years for a number of reasons, and some of them were just simply interruptions. When I started working on this book, I had not even become pregnant with my daughter yet, so I was living a very different life. I now have a 3.5-year-old. So there was the interruption of going on parental leave for a bit. Of course, then there was the interruption of the pandemic starting, and kind of just everything turning upside down. We lost childcare, as so many people did, and we were still working 2 full-time jobs. And we kind of, that year, we really were prioritizing, everyone was staying home. Everyone really needed cooking ideas, online. And so that kind of became a slowdown for the book. It was like, okay, we really need to be there for our audience who are all cooking at home right now. Like, get on Instagram Live, shoot your videos from home, like do all of these things to like be there for people who are like cooking more than they ever have maybe before. So that was one delay. And then we ran into some of the like supply chain issues that so many other cookbooks have, those kinds of things. So it just kind of kept getting pushed. And that meant that the book did evolve a lot over that time. But the things that didn't really change are, right when we started out, we knew so this started as a book that was aimed at beginners pretty exclusively.
Yeah.
And the title Simply Genius didn't come up until fairly late in the process. It was actually called Genius Cooking as like a placeholder name for a long time. And none of us really knew what that meant, but we knew we wanted to do a beginner cookbook. I knew that I wanted to bring in a lot of extra like visual elements, more so than other Genius cookbooks and other cookbooks we'd done at Food52. So that did end up coming to pass. And that was another thing that took so long, was when we wanted to make a different looking and different feeling cookbook with different utility than the ones we'd made before. I certainly did not realize how hard that was going to be. And it was even harder doing it in the pandemic with our teams kind of scattered. When we started working on the book, I was in my office at Food52, surrounded by our creative team and our editorial team and our test kitchen and our studio, like all these resources that made it really easy to kind of collaborate and make creative decisions and come up with new ideas. And then we were all flung all about and planning all of this. Even 10 Speed, our publisher, most of them are located in the Bay Area where I am now, but our designer was in New York. So all of this was happening over Zooms, and there was a lot of iterating on designs, things that I thought would fit in the book. Just in practice, once you get it all on the page, we had to keep kind of like streamlining to make it both make sense and be something that was visually pleasing and usable. And once we decided on the name Simply Genius, stood up to the name Simply Genius and didn't feel too complicated. It still is a bit complex in that there's a lot of different visual elements, but we wanted to try to make sure that it was as visual and playful and colorful and joyful as we could. That was another thing I think that came out of working on it in the pandemic, is like, we were squeezing as much joy as we could in, because we were really hungry for it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if people at home realize that, during the pandemic, that people were doing photo shoots remotely. So you would have I had to sit in on a photo shoot. It was actually for a newspaper, but watching from my screen a shoot that was happening in another state and looking at the camera angles. And did you do that with this book?
Yes, which was a really big change for me, because with Genius Recipes and Genius Desserts, the first two Genius cookbooks, I just happened to be the on-set food stylist. So, you know, I literally had my hands on every picture in the book, making sure that the recipes looked the way that they did when I had tested them and the way that I thought the original authors would want them to look. And this time, while there were other things that were very hands-on, I was in California and our studio team was in New York. So I was calling in from Zoom, and luckily they are just, they're so talented. They're so generous. They were so open to me kind of micromanaging from another coast, just because, you know, if they were my recipes, I think I could have been a little more freewheeling with it. Like, oh, that's a great idea for garnish. Let's add that to the recipe. But with other people's recipes, I didn't want to stray. So, you know, that was a lot of my feeling of responsibility in those shoots, was making sure that the recipes were like exactly as the original authors had intended them, and also making sure that there was space for all of these kind of wacky different pages and visual elements. You know, the pages where there's like a photo, and I can actually show maybe an example. Like, you know, some of the photos have captions on them. So I would have to kind of, you know, clue people in, like, okay, this is going to be on a page with like a little timing chart here and a little, like, you know, a title and a little like explanation here. And then there's got to be space where we can read a caption to point out a couple different elements. So I was
that's an incredible amount of detail to know before a shoot. Like, so had you already pretty much planned and designed the book prior to the shoot?
Kind of. It lived in certain ways in spreadsheets, in like Google spreadsheets. And then actually, for anyone who might have seen a Genius video during a certain period of time a couple years ago, they would have maybe seen that when I was doing interviews like this, even with people like you, Hetty, sometimes behind me were all of these papers like falling down off the walls of my office, because most of the book was like, I was just taping paper to the wall to try to see how it could all come together.
Well, there's so many lovely little graphic details in there. And I mean, I was going to ask you this later, but since we're talking about it, I love these pages where I don't know if you can see that because I've got the blur background on. Sorry.
I can hold it up. What page do you have?
Maybe you hold it. I've got the page about what exactly do you mean by shallot and how to mince it? Because I feel like a lot of people don't know what a shallot is, or what, because, you know, they come in so many different sizes. And then sometimes you open one and there's like two stuck together. So do you use both of them, or do you just use half of it? Like, technically, is a shallot like that has two halves? Is that one shallot, or is it two?
You know, frankly,
but it's a really,
here,
it's a really cool page.
So that's this page here, and it's to accompany Molly Ye's what's it called? Roasted potatoes with paprika mayo. So here's her recipe. And then every recipe, every like main recipe in the book has some extra support to it. So this one shows a couple photos that are like the key kind of genius steps that Molly uses. Not, you know, I didn't want to show every single step, but the ones where it really mattered and you wanted to see like a texture to know when something was done, or to illustrate like, this is why something really stands out. And you might want to, even if you don't follow Molly's recipe exactly, next time you can take this tip and riff on it. And then in this case, it is a how-to on mincing shallots. To answer your question, frankly, I don't know what a shallot is. I think because I think you don't know what, unless an author spells it out, you don't know what they thought a shallot was. Like, I think there, you know, perhaps there is a standard definition, but what I'm always wondering about with the recipes that I'm testing is, do we know for sure what the original author meant by shallot? Also, you know, my shallot that I picked up at the supermarket might be gigantic, and one from the farmer's market across the country or across the world might be completely different. So in this recipe, I think I ultimately made sure that there was a volume measurement. Yes, 2 to 3 tablespoons minced shallot to taste. So no matter what size shallot you have, this recipe will work. But in that how-to, it was, I think, kind of speaking to, like, you may not know exactly what the original author meant, but you can think about how much shallot you want in a recipe, and think about, okay, if it's going to be cooked or like sauteed or roasted or something, then you can go all in and have as much shallot as you want. You don't really need to worry about it. But if it's going to be raw, and maybe if you are sensitive to strong oniony or shalloty flavors, you can think about how much, and that can also inform how much you want, how finely you want to mince or chop it. So that was sort of what I was speaking to there. And then, of course, I wanted to show, especially since this is a book that is aimed at beginners, but also busy cooks, how to mince it, how to get through the peel, and get down to the really, like, smithereens kind of bits that you want in a dressing like Molly's.
Yeah, I really loved it because I think that mincing is actually quite a chefy term, I was told. Very early on in my food writing and recipe development, I was told not to use it because my editor said that's a really chefy term and no home cook knows what mincing actually is. So I usually say finely chopped, but the whole shallot thing is quite funny. And then there's also one thing that I learned from this book was to wash mushrooms. I never wash my mushrooms. I kind of just brush them off vaguely. I like to eat dirt, obviously. But you actually say it's okay to wash mushrooms because it doesn't actually absorb all the water, which I imagined that it would. So that's pretty cool.
That's one of those things that I think, we see the way mushrooms behave in a pan, how they drink up everything. I can see why we've gotten there to where, like, that's something that people often admonish us not to do in recipes. But I think, so I learned that tip from Cooks Illustrated. I think they tested, they actually washed various mushrooms and then weighed them after to see how much water they took on, and they didn't. So,
wow.
So that was where and those kinds of tips are the ones that I kind of squirrel away when I see them, because I just hate wiping down mushrooms. When I have in the past tried to be, diligent and do it, not wash them, do it the way that, other people have told me to do, I end up, by the end, I just don't want to eat the mushrooms anymore, because I'm just wondering, like, did I get all the dirt? And instead, if you can just hose it with your faucet, and towel dry them and move on with your life, it makes me want to eat mushrooms more often.
Yeah, it's life-changing because now I won't eat as much dirt. I mean, I eat a lot of mushrooms, but I'm not very diligent with cleaning them.
What do you typically do? Do you try to wipe them off, or do you just kind of say, the dirt's fine?
I kind of embrace its natural state. I mean, like little tips like that so have you been squirreling away tips for years? Because that's a good one.
Absolutely. Both, I mean, from so many different places too. Like, that one I think I stumbled across in a Cooks Illustrated article. Things that I've accidentally discovered, things I've learned from recipes from people like you, like your accidental whipped hummus that I featured in Genius Recipes, where you were brave enough to, after dumping in the whole can of chickpeas with the liquid, you just decided to press on and make your hummus anyway. And then it was this incredible, like, whipped aquafaba, beautiful texture. So those kinds of tips I pick up along the way, but also because I've been writing Genius Recipes for like 11 years now, and I've been talking to our community online at Food52 for more like 12 or so. And, learning from the Food52 community on Food52, on YouTube, on Instagram, all over the place. People, like, especially now that I'm doing videos on YouTube and on Food52, when I'm doing something that other people have opinions on, they let me know. And I learn so much that way. Like, sometimes I ask and sometimes I don't. And either way, when I see those comments, I love trying out new ways of doing things that I've learned about from people commenting online.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the community is so essential to everything that happens at Food52. It's a two-way symbiotic relationship, isn't it? And I think that's what makes it so unique.
Mm-hmm.
Do you actually try all the tips that people give you?
I mean, yeah, especially if it's something that I say, like slicing a bell pepper, there's probably hundreds of ways to do it, really. Like I've always just kind of cut out the core and then, like taken out as many of the seeds as I can and like have it scoop out the rest of the ribs and seeds. Uh-oh, did I just lose? Are you still there? Okay,
Yeah,
good.
I can see you.
Okay, good. I think a spam call was coming in and it like shoved you away, but you're back.
We're all here still.
Good. So, and then like, chop it or slice it. That's how I typically always did it. But then when in that case, I actually did ask like, hey, is this the easiest way to get to a chopped or a sliced bell pepper? You let me know. And many people actually said that they like to actually just slice straight through. You got the whole bell pepper sliced straight through the stem and all. And then it's really easy once you have it in half to just pull out the stem and all of the seeds. And then
that's what I do.
Is that what you do? Yeah, it's brilliant. And it's something I never would have intuitively thought to do for some reason. I don't know. It's
so we all just get used to doing things a certain way. We don't actually think about, is this the most efficient way of doing it? Or is there a better way? We just do what we usually do, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. And then like over time, taste change, how much time we have to prep vegetables changes. I don't stress about getting all the seeds out. Like I take out the big clump, but I kind of like leaving some seeds in now too, they get kind of, they're like extra crunchy bits. Yeah. It's sort of like, why would we go to the trouble of excavating every single last seed and then like put on crunchy garnish, like sea salt or, if you have some other sort of crispy thing you put on top, like you had crispy things there to begin with. So you could just like save some time and leave them in there too.
Yeah, I kind of feel that's the same way about pumpkin seeds or squash seeds, like when how some of them get stuck in the membrane and they're really hard to get out. Just roast it all up and you've got like crunchy pepitas. What are your favorite if you had to choose 3 of your favorite genius tips from the book, what would they be?
Oh my gosh, that is really hard. If you have any, okay, I can tell you certainly the recipe that I make the most from the book is Samantha Senavarotna's cocoa almond oatmeal. So I can't really stop talking about it. I literally have had it every day for the last week because right now it's actively a brag with my daughter. It's always been the recipe we've made most because she loves it. We love making it
that's
together.
The chocolate one.
Yes. And I can show it too if that's helpful.
That is on my list to make.
So the main genius trick with this recipe, I'll just show it quickly, there it is. You see it's in a nonstick skillet. So I learned about this recipe from Sam back when we were working on a shoot together at Food52 a few years ago. And she just casually mentioned that she makes oatmeal pretty much every day for her, I think then he was 3, her 3-year-old son, pretty much every day in a nonstick skillet because it cleans up quicker. It also happens to cook a little quicker. It's a little creamier the way that she does it too, because there's a bit of extra milk in there and it just kind of like bubbles down quickly and gets very creamy fast. And most importantly, does not leave a sticky pot sitting in your sink all day soaking for you to discover at 6 when you get home. So
that's the worst.
Yeah, that for this book, it really stuck with me. And then when I went back and asked her to share a recipe for the book, she generously gave me this one, this particular flavor combination plus 3 other flavor riffs in the book. And the main recipe is one we just make constantly because it's just so incredibly good. There's a lot of cocoa powder in the oatmeal itself. I think for a single serving, there's 4 teaspoons of unsweetened cocoa powder. So it's a lot, but so it's kind of like bittersweet from the cocoa powder, and probably has all kinds of great like antioxidants, I think. That's how I'm justifying chocolate oatmeal every day. But then there's no sweetener in the oatmeal. She swirls in almond butter, or sometimes we do peanut butter, other nut butters, and then she just does like a maple syrup on the top. so that like that balancing of like bittersweet chocolate, the nutty creamy almond butter, the sweet maple is just like kind of a unforgettable combination. And now actually, so my daughter just got home, so I just saw her run by. She right now she for a while she was like popping up at 4 o'clock in the morning, waking us up every day. And so we finally were like, look, if you stay in your bed all night, you get chocolate oatmeal in the morning. So she's done it for a week straight. And we're just gonna keep riding that as long as we can.
Must be a great recipe.
It is, and I mean, it's sort of sneaky because like we would make it for her anyway, but like there's something about like I think she feels like she can accomplish something, and she's gonna, you know, she can see the reward of it that day. So that's definitely a favorite recipe. And even if we weren't doing the cocoa part, that's typically how I make oatmeal these days. And then in terms of other tips, let's see, are there any like any prompts? Because I have hundreds.
Yeah, there's so many. I mean, I've got all these questions. I haven't asked you any of them because we're just chatting like we're on the phone, like old friends. But I was so delighted to see this recipe in this book. It's Victoria Granoff's pasta con cece, which is a recipe I've been making for years since you guys published it actually on your website. And it's so good. I mean, I don't know why I'd never done this before, but it's basically, I guess it's a soup, but it's not a very soupy soup. It's got like ditalini. I'll see if I can show it. Can you see that?
Yeah, and it's funny. It keeps like highlighting just the bowl as if it's a face.
Yeah. But anyway, it's just pasta and chickpeas and tomato paste. Tomato paste is the revelation for me in this particular recipe because she doesn't actually use canned tomatoes or fresh tomatoes. She uses 3 tablespoons of tomato paste that just serves 2 people. So it's quite tomato paste heavy. And that's where all the flavor comes from, which got me thinking about tomato paste and the way we use it. And perhaps we should be using more of it than we actually do, because what it is actually concentrated tomatoes. It's got so much flavor in it already. And I really like using, and I just love, this is just like I mean, honestly, I've been making this recipe for years, and it's like, you know, every time I don't know what to make, I've always got bits of pasta in the pantry and chickpeas, and it's a genius recipe. So I'm really happy that's in the book.
Yeah, it's I really do take that trick. You know, my favorite genius recipes are the ones where you can take the sort of genius surprising element and take it to other things. And this one, it's in the chapter called, what is it? I don't want to mess up the name. I named all of these chapters based on meal and need. So there's 3 dinner chapters. This one happens to be the quickest pantry dinner shortlist, because her recipe is, you know, it's straight from the pantry. I mean, I forget how long it cooks, but you have it on the table within 30 minutes. I'm pretty sure you're basically just using like boiling water, and all the flavor comes from the toasty garlic that you get a little bit brown, which is a little bit of a surprise because so many recipes tell you not to brown the garlic. But she gets it just a little golden, and then the caramelized tomato paste that brings, so you can, you know, make this kind of brothy, soupy stew without having, you know, a nice homemade stock or even boxed broth, because you can just do water, because all of this flavor is coming from the tomato paste and the garlic. And so now if I'm making a soup or a stew and it's tasting kind of flat, sometimes I will just take a side skillet and put a little olive oil in it and put some tomato paste in and caramelize it, and then like pour it into the pot to add more umami, to add more depth. So
I feel like tomato paste is a really underused but really powerful pantry ingredient. An interesting thing I know about Victoria, because I know her, is that she told me years ago that she keeps a pot of boiling water on her stove at all times. So she wakes up in the morning, she turns the pot on, and it's just kind of simmers there. And she uses it throughout the day. that could be a genius tip. I just gave you Victoria's genius tip, but I was so
Wow.
riveted by that because I wondered where that had come from. It had to have come from, you know, her parents or her mother or her grandmother, but it was such an interesting thing that she told me. It always stuck with me. But
So
speaking
and I'm
of
curious how
Victoria,
else she uses.
yeah. Well, I noticed in this recipe it says boil the water. It's like it's an actual thing to do, an actual step to do in the recipe, and that kind of just reminded me of something she told me years ago. But I mean, Victoria is one of the people. I mean, all the recipes in this book are from chefs and recipe developers. What was it like working with so many huge names in the food industry, like Tamo Talengi, Sammy Termini, Tony Clifton Martin, Molly, as you've already mentioned, Victoria? Like, there's some big names in here. How was that? What was that process like for you?
It was incredible. I feel so lucky that everyone like wrote back, you know, because I reached out to everybody to see if they would be willing to share their recipe for this book, and it wouldn't exist if I couldn't have gotten a hold of all of the people who are in this book one way or another. You know, some people are you know, I had to go through their PR representatives. Some people I was able to contact directly. Some people, like you, developed a new recipe for this book, or some, like Sam, developed 3 new riffs and shared a new recipe. So it kind of runs the gamut from, you know, folks who, like, I just kind of asked them to share a recipe and they granted permission and everything, to people who actually like collaborated with me on something new for the book. And it was also amazing. It did take a really long time. That's probably another thing that that maybe contributed to how long this book took, because I would say maybe, and this was 2021, a lot of the work on this book ended up coming together in 2021, and a lot of that was trying to chase down every single person who was represented in this book.
Yeah. So did you ask for a specific recipe? Like, had you chosen the genius recipe, or did you allow those people to choose their genius recipe?
In the 2021 part of it, it was like, you know, this is the recipe that I'd love to include. Is that okay with you? Like, you know, what do you need from me? Do you want to see it before it goes to press? Like, you know, that kind of like, I've already chosen this. I know exactly where I want it to go. I really hope that you'll be open to sharing it with me. But there were a lot of people who I also reached out to earlier on. You know, I just kind of, every time I work on a Genius cookbook, I try to seek out tips from everywhere I can think of. So I ask the Food52 community, I ask our Facebook baking and cookbook clubs. I reach out to people who I admire, who either are cookbook authors like yourself, or maybe food editors, test kitchen directors, anyone who I've ever crossed paths with who work in food, who might have come across something interesting and something that like stands out in their memory. So in some cases, when I was doing that kind of outreach, some people would share a recipe from someone else, some people would share one of their own recipes. So it was kind of a mix of things, but there were some people who suggested things, but earlier on in the process. Or like, I went to Dory Greenspan and said, okay, your French yogurt cake, I would really love to include it in this book. It's such a perfect recipe for beginners and people who just like want to have a back pocket, you know, kind of pound cake like recipe. And she had just happened to make a version of that cake. She riffs on it all the time, just like she does with so many of her recipes. But she had made that recipe in like a summary version for a cooking class, with some, I think, college students who made the cake in their dorm kitchens in their toaster ovens.
Wow.
And the riff that she made was blueberry and thyme. So she shared that recipe for the book, and then we had a few riffs as well on that one. So I was really, really lucky to get, I mean, this was a lonely time. This was peak pandemic, and I was, you know, my pen pals were the authors in this book, which was
that's so nice.
It was, yeah, I mean, including yourself, like getting to sort of, you know, collaborate on and like hear your ideas for a new recipe for this book, which we should talk about. We should talk about your recipe in this book.
Yes, we should. Now, I'm just looking at the time, so we're good, But I was just going to say to people, if you've got questions, you need to drop them into the Q&A box, I believe, and not the other one, the chat. So just a little reminder.
Thank you so much for being organized, Hetty.
Yes, so my recipe in the book is a gnocchi recipe, which kind of had a couple of iterations. When we first spoke, it was going to be the sheet pan pierogi recipe that I did for the New York Times, probably maybe a couple of years ago now. So it was a sheet pan with like baked gnocchi with kimchi. It's kind of a crazy recipe with kimchi and a dill sour cream. And we didn't end up running that recipe, but we kind of developed this one together using gnocchi, which is this, it's just a pantry hero, isn't it? It's become like there are 2 gnocchi recipes in here, and I'm really very keen to try the other one, which is Ali Slagle's. It's like a pizza, a skill. No, what is it? A pizza gnocchi. Is that right?
Pepperoni pizza gnocchi, and hers is done in a skillet, yours is done on the sheet pan. Very different.
Yeah, I mean, for weeknight cooking, and it kind of touches on something you spoke about earlier, is it's a book for beginners. And actually, when I looked at this book, I did not think it was for beginners, because I wanted it for me. I was so excited when I opened this book, and I think I texted a friend and I said, I am obsessed with this book, because for me, it was just instantly quick weeknight dinners. And that's all I'm really interested in right now, to be completely honest, because I cook all day, I cook all the time, and I'm always thinking about food. And sometimes, a lot of the time I eat what I've developed for work, but sometimes I just want something that's going to come together in less than half an hour. And this book is full of it, so I almost think it's like, it's for beginners, but it's just for anyone who wants a weeknight savior, who just wants someone to answer, that question. And I know we're not talking about the skillet gnocchi, but the sheet pan gnocchi, we'll get there. But it kind of reminded me of something my mother used to say. She used to say, actually, the hardest bit about dinner is thinking about it, is deciding what to cook. It's not the actual cooking. And I 400% agree with her. Is sometimes I will sit for a very long time, and I might be on a call, or I might be developing a recipe, but I'll really be thinking about what I'm going to make for dinner. And until I've sorted that thought out, I will not feel relaxed. Like I won't be 100%, there doing what I'm meant to be doing, because I'm thinking about dinner. So I feel like this book solves that question a lot of the time. Like you could just open it up, and there's so many possibilities using ingredients that you've possibly already got in your pantry. It honestly is, it's going to be my weeknight savior, because sometimes I just want to open a book and say, oh, that's what I'm going to have. But anyway, that was my spiel. That was my love letter to Simply Genius.
I'm so happy to hear that. I mean, that's how it evolved too. It started out for beginners, and then in all of these changes that I went through in life, becoming a parent, and then going through the pandemic, and really having to cook 3 meals a day for the first, with not a lot of access to other support, or we weren't going out to eat and do the dishes and all of that. Like that, and then I moved from New York to California, and then moved a couple more times in California, and all of that really informed this book. That was exactly what happened for me. It was this book. I started out thinking this is going to be for my future child when she's learning to cook, and then I was like, no, this is actually, I mean, I hope that it still speaks to beginners as well, and is inviting to beginners, but really anybody who is really busy and wants good food need simple recipes.
Yes.
So, and I needed them. If it didn't fit into that wild life that was happening over the last few years, it didn't make it into the book because it couldn't.
Yeah. I think that particularly now, I think so many people are interested in cooking since the pandemic, since we've all kind of you know, it's just been a huge revolution in the food industry in this country. And so many people are interested but don't know where to start. And I think this book is a great place to start, but also the recipes are so interesting and so flavorful that it's not like, when you think about beginner food, it tends to be like, oh, is it super boring? But it's actually not. It's incredibly, all the recipes are really clever. So yeah, I think it's great for that. And then, you know, the sheet pan gnocchi is, I think, an excellent beginner recipe because it's actually no
So good.
technique in there. It is like just using what you have in your pantry. And like, I think if you don't already, I feel like everyone should always at all times have at least 2 packets of, you know, the vacuum sealed gnocchi, not the expensive stuff, just the stuff you buy from the shelf stable gnocchi, because it keeps forever. And well, probably not forever, but it keeps for a long time, and you can use it in so many ways. And in this case, it really is the backbone of this dish. Whereas, you know, you're using basically the oven. It's a completely hands-off dish. You use the oven, and the sheet pan is basically your cooking apparatus. And high heat, crisp up your gnocchi. They almost taste like little crispy baby potatoes. Like I love that. And they're a little bit chewy, and it's kind of coated in a chili crisp before it goes in the oven. And we spoke about this last week, but I think a chili crisp is more than just spice. I actually think it's more about the umami than the spice. It just happens to be a little bit spicy, but the umami in a chili crisp, and a well-made chili crisp, should be very layered. It's not just chili. There should be, you know, some alliums in there and spices in some cases, and that's fast flavor already. So that's a really essential. Having essential condiments in your pantry is really important too. So yeah, I mean, I think this recipe comes together in about 5 minutes. It's just all pantry things thrown together, high heat. This has baby bok choy, but you can almost use any quick-ish cooking vegetables, like broccoli would work really well, broccolini, things like that. So yeah, but that's that gnocchi recipe. But I think we have a couple of questions relating to beginner recipes, which I might ask you now, Kristen.
Sure.
Emma Ferguson has asked, what do you think makes a recipe beginner friendly? What are your criteria?
Thank you. That is such a great question. I went back and forth on this in the beginning of working on this book, because there's kind of a spectrum, right? Of you can have a recipe like an Ina Garten recipe where it's, you know, there's lots of white space on the page. It's presented very simply. And obviously her books are incredibly successful and people really rely on them. And then you have sort of the other end of the spectrum where there's a lot of hand holding, a lot of extra explanation in every step, a lot of, like, you know, warnings like, okay, it might look like this at this point, don't worry about it. And, you know, here's what it should look like now. And here's an extra little tip that's not even part of the recipe, but like, I want you to know that if you want to do the recipe, you know, if you want to save some for later, hold it to this point. So those kinds of recipes that are really like a friend talking you through in the kitchen. And I was kind of wondering, I think that my default is to go towards the latter and to try and like explain as much as I can and not leave anything behind. And that's what I wanted to do. But I did wonder, you know, at a certain point, if you include too much information, it can become difficult to wade through when you're just trying to get dinner on the table too. So there is probably a sweet spot in there, but I felt very encouraged by, you know, the recent successes of, you know, Julia Turshen's books have a lot, you know, her recipes are very simple, but there's a lot of explanation and hand holding in them. Dory Greenspan's always been that, you know, has always warned you like, oh, your batter might be lumpy right now, but don't stress about it, that sort of thing. There's so many authors who right now are leaning more in that direction of trying to walk us through in a friendly voice. And the fact that, I mean, obviously Samin Nosrat, that salt, fat, acid, heat is, you know, it's a lot of explanation. And that book has been wildly successful because I think that beginners, you know, everyone wants to learn to cook differently, but many beginners really appreciate that extra, information all contained within a recipe. So that's what I was going for. I wanted to keep myself honest and not make a simple 1-page recipe into a 6-page recipe just because I was trying to think of every possible question that could come up. But the essential things and the things that I thought were going to be the most helpful, I tried to include. And then thinking about things like we talked about with the shallot, like instead of just saying 1 shallot, like this could mean so many things, and trying to think about what is going to be the most universally usable no matter what you're working with. And similarly, trying to avoid culinary lingo that, maybe I take for granted at this point because I've seen enough recipes, but a beginner might not, might be familiar with. There's the Schitt's Creek scene that is so famous at this point where they're struggling to understand what folding in means.
Yeah.
So trying to make sure that the recipes didn't have those kinds of things that would assume knowledge or make you send you to Google to look something up. I tried to make things like relatively contained within the recipe that you could use it even if you just dove in on 1 page.
Yeah, that sounds great.
What about Hetty?
Jocelyn? Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to ask you, Hetty, if there was anything else you would add to what would make a good beginner recipe, or if anyone in the chat has something that I'm not thinking of too, I would love to know.
I don't know. I feel like one thing that I write recipes differently depending on what it's for. Like, for example, when I'm writing for the Times, I actually try to use less ingredients because I'm very cognizant of the audience and how it looks when it's on a computer or on a phone, and you don't want to be scrolling. And I think that a long list of recipes scares people off. So it's kind of, I have to recalibrate the way I think sometimes and say, oh, could I use less spices? Because I think a lot of the time, and I hear it all the time, people get scared off by a long list of recipes, even a long list of ingredients, even if 4 of those ingredients are like salt and pepper and olive oil and lemon. They're not really looking at that. So I think from a visual point of view, a lot of the time it's kind of less is more kind of approach. But yeah, I don't know. Jocelyn would like to know what recipe would be good to try as a college student.
Oh,
to try first as a college student.
To try first. Okay, well, we've already talked about a couple of them because you can make Dory Greenspan's French yogurt cake in your toaster oven, as it turns out. So that's a great cake. And speaking of beginner recipes, one other sort of conceit I had with this book was I really didn't want to ask for a lot of equipment. So everything in the desserts chapter, like none of it requires a stand mixer or, a food processor or anything like that too. So I tried to make the equipment list as bare bones as possible too. So that was kind of how I selected the desserts for that chapter, was things that you could mix together in a bowl with a spoon. Certainly the pasta concetti that you mentioned from Victoria Granoff is a fantastic recipe for a college student. Because it's very economical. It's just a few pantry ingredients. You can make it with, just in a pot. There's so many. I love Andrea Nguyen's Soy Seared Tofu. It's kind of the only way that I cook tofu anymore, unless I'm testing a new technique or a new recipe. And it just can kind of go on anything. And the reason it's so memorable to me is because it kind of flipped how I assumed you would want to crisp up tofu. She puts the tofu in a nonstick skillet, not with any oil at first, just with soy sauce. And the tofu, like a sponge, drinks up the soy sauce. So it permeates really well, and it gets kind of brown. And then you pour in the oil to crisp it. So that time in the pan means that the extra water in the tofu is kind of steaming away. The soy sauce is getting absorbed. You don't have to press it or freeze it to rid it of any of that moisture, and then you crisp it up. So that's another good go-to that you can put on salads, you can put on rice, you can, in this book, she works it into her con soup, which is just another really pantry-friendly soup that doesn't require a homemade stock or a boxed stock, because you're just using water and a lot of the flavor is coming from sliced onions and fish sauce. So it gives a ton of flavor to a quick broth. And then she adds in greens and a protein and some ginger. And the protein could be shrimp or fish. And in this case, she also included the soy seared tofu recipe. But I think really anything in that, like the quick pantry dinner shortlist is going to probably be a great starting point for college students. And for, I mean, great starting point
and for me
too.
And for me, because I actually, any dessert recipe where I don't have to get my stand mix is actually on my bench all the time. But I hate using it because I hate washing it up. So any one bowl dessert recipe is my instant friend. So thank you for that chapter. And I was going to say something else to what you just said, but it was excellent. Anyway, there's two more questions. Melissa has said, thank you so much for your time. So much of your time is devoted to writing, developing, editing, and testing recipes. How do you stay inspired about food? This question is to both of us, by the way. Where do you go to feel excited about food again and gain fresh insights? What is intriguing to you these days? And she just ordered your book. Would you like to go first?
Thank you so much. Oh gosh, that is, it's harder to find inspiration these days for me because I'm not in a city anymore. I'm in the suburbs, and I used to find inspiration just by kind of wandering around in New York City and you know, wandering into restaurants, wandering into shops. And I have to be a little bit more what's the word, premeditated, I guess, about it now. I mean, definitely cookbooks. You can see my stacks behind me. That's just like in the last couple of years, those are the stacks that have developed. It's not including what's on the other bookshelf scattered around the house. I mean, I learn from new cookbooks and new recipes all the time. It's funny that when I started learning to cook, I thought I didn't need recipes, and that was just so silly because I quickly learned that even if I made something well one time, when I tried to recreate it again, it would come out wildly different because I was just learning. I didn't know that like this much garlic powder is delicious and this much garlic powder is toxic, you know. And those things, those are great ways to learn too, of course, but like I've really obviously developed an appreciation over time for learning from recipes. And I now think that kind of the reason I've been able to keep doing Genius recipes all this time is because once you learn how to do something from a recipe, and especially a well-written recipe that has you know, all these pointers embedded within the head note and the instructions, then you over time, the more you cook from recipes, you get this little Rolodex of like, oh, I can do that thing that Hetty did with the, you know, throwing the gnocchi on the sheet pan, or I can use chili crisp to bring umami into this dish. Like all those little things that you pick up along the way are the ways that I have continued to learn to cook all these years and still do, and continue to get inspiration. I would say those are, I mean, and you know, I suppose all the other usual, like, you know, from social media, from stumbling on, I mean, Waffles and Mochi just came back, so I can't wait to watch that. Anyone who hasn't watched that show, it's so inspiring, and it gets my daughter like running to the kitchen and wanting to find mushrooms and corn and all, whatever ingredients they're talking about.
Great.
Yeah. What about you, Hetty? Do you have, you know, how do you stay inspired with all the cookbooks that you've worked on?
I mean, I'm always inspired by food. It's actually it shocks me that I feel like there's always more. And obviously there are periods you feel much more inspired than other times. But you know, I write so many different styles of recipes. You know, for me, when I'm working on a book, it's a story. So I'm thinking about recipes in perhaps a different way than when I'm writing, like for one of the columns. It's story driven. A lot of it is triggers from childhood, or I don't know, a smell or a texture that I remember that I ate when I was a kid, and that's what's driving me to create something. And most of the time, it's not the dish that I actually ate, but it's elements of it. It's elements of the textures and the smells and perhaps an ingredient. So that's a huge inspiration for me. And I feel like that is an evolving inspiration. Like never stops. It just keeps changing as I get older and as I experience more things. And I think that living in a city, I live in Brooklyn, but living in New York really is huge inspiration. And it's more than I actually thought. I was in Sydney recently because my book TENDERHEART came out in Australia about 2 weeks ago. And in Melbourne, this lady stood up and asked me a question, and I was quite taken aback by it. She'd said to me she was from Brooklyn and she loved my recipes because they reminded her of home, of Brooklyn. And I never thought or would think that my recipes somehow represent Brooklyn, because it's my adopted home. I've only lived here for 7 years. But I then kind of started thinking about how much a city affects the way you cook and the way you think about food. I definitely think that when I'm in Australia, I think about food also differently there. And so I think it's like our environments, I think our environments are really inspirational. And now that we can eat in restaurants again, and, like I shared a fresh pineapple stir fry on my newsletter this week that was inspired by a dish that I'd eaten at a Malaysian restaurant in New York just by chance. I'd never eaten that type of dish before, but I came home, I tried to recreate the flavors, and that's always really exciting to eat out again and to actually experience how other people cook. Because I learned a lot from that, like different flavor combinations and experience food from other cultures. I think that's always a huge thing. And travel. I spent a lot of time in Australia this summer, and just the food was just so wonderful and so different, but just I just got a lot of inspiration from there. So yeah, I think all those things, just everything around us, I think there's inspiration. And I'm just conscious that there's one other question from Christine Warman. Hi, Chris. Were there any recipes that didn't make the cut, and how difficult was it to choose?
Oh, I'm trying to think. I mean, there were a few recipes that didn't make the cut because I couldn't get a hold of the authors. So that was sort of heartbreaking. There were some that I really loved that if I couldn't get a hold of the authors and get their their permission to use the recipe, I couldn't use it. Trying to think about recipes that didn't make the cut. It was so working on this puzzle was so complicated that there was not a lot of, unlike in your book, Hetty, TENDERHEART, where you had, 22 chapters on vegetables, and then you just offered 2 more chapters that had to be cut from the book, right? For a pre-order bonus. Is that right? Were they intended to be in the book initially?
They actually weren't, but I couldn't stop creating. Like, there were these recipes that I hadn't, they were like these 2 vegetables that weren't in the book, and I kind of felt like it was unfinished business. But the book is 500 pages already, so there was a point where I had to stop. But it was a corn chapter, and I actually eat a lot of corn. But when I chose and you might experience this too, like sometimes when you're thinking about a book, you're just driven by, it's almost like an instinct of what should go in there. It's not a conscious decision. I didn't consciously not have a corn chapter. It just didn't happen. But after I finished the book and handed in the manuscript, I kind of wanted to write a corn chapter, and I wanted to write a green bean chapter. So that became the pre-order bonus in Australia. It probably will not be the pre-order bonus in the US because of the seasonal changes, or I'm actually adding some other recipes for the US pre-order bonus. Wow. Will be actually a lot of root stuff for the winter, and I might kind of tack on the corn. But yeah, sometimes sometimes it's not that you don't choose the recipes choose the book. It's like they have to be in there, and sometimes there's just not enough room. Cookbook business is kind of cutthroat sometimes. as you would know, in terms of like space
Right.
and how many photos can I have, and how many pages do I get, and all that stuff. So
Right. It's not like you can just be like, oh, can you just squeeze in one more page? It's like then you add a whole signature, which is, at least for us, it's 28 pages. And that's
yes,
adding cost to the book. It changes the price of the book. So like we knew from the very beginning we had to stick to the page numbers, and I just had to make the puzzle pieces work from there. I think it's so cool that you just kept going with yours though.
I love it.
It's amazing.
I just kept going. I'm still going, actually.
Yeah.
Unstoppable.
Can't be stopped.
Love it. Well, thank you so much to both of you. I'm just such big fans of both of your work personally. And of course, we're very excited to get a chance to chat with both of you today. And oh my gosh, everything you were talking about, especially those quick recipes. I feel like especially this time of year, that's just all I'm searching for. Things just feel so busy and I just need something. I love what you were saying about like almost deciding is the hardest part. So it's great to have a list you can just kind of turn to. So yeah, I'm very excited to cook through, and congratulations on the fantastic book, Kristen. It's
Thank
absolutely
you so much.
fantastic. I also dropped in the chat, we just opened up pre-orders for the US version of TENDERHEART. So we do have that available as well. And of course, we're very excited for that one to come out next spring.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Book Louder, for having us. And congrats, Kristen.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Hetty, for this amazing conversation. And thank you all for joining us. This has been really fun. And if you have any other questions about the book, if you want to chat about recipes, I'm at Miglorious on Instagram. I love hearing from you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your evening with us. And of course, everyone, thank you for joining us. And we will see you all again soon. Have a great night.
Bye.
Thank you.